Hello, my name is Sherry Caulfield, and this is the presentation of my final unit plan. I thought that I would first go through the general information of the unit plan and then briefly hit on each lesson within the unit plan. So first of all, the topic of the unit is medieval Europe. It is a 7th grade history class, and the duration of each unit is about 45 minutes. I teach at Caliber Beta Academy, a charter school located in Richmond, California. We go over a range of medieval topics, and we are going to switch kind of from going over medieval civilizations after medieval Europe to going over like big things such as the Renaissance, Enlightenment, Reformation, things like this. There are about 80 7th graders, and the social studies classes have about 25 kids, which are predominantly Latino. The standards are mostly about feudalism, understanding conflict between the monarchy and the church, and then understanding kind of the importance of the church. I wanted to hit the highest leverage unit or standards in order to shift to kind of the causes of the Renaissance in the next unit, because the medieval Europe standards are a lot and they're really big, so I couldn't hit them all. That's why I chose to hit these specific ones. The essential questions include: how did the system of feudalism structure daily life? What was the relationship between the Catholic Church and monarchs in Europe? What were the lasting effects of kind of like the laws in medieval Europe? And in what way did the Catholic Church shape life and culture in medieval Europe? The first part and the first week of the unit is just basic recall, remembering. We're going to do a lot of vocabulary front loading, and these are just to make sure they understand the basic concepts of vocabulary, feudalism, and the church. As the unit progresses, the questioning and thinking gets higher. They are asked to apply their knowledge to primary source analysis, and by the end of the unit, they're really synthesizing their knowledge of medieval Europe, their knowledge of the primary and secondary sources, as well as their own thinking and their own opinions. It is kind of a chronological time period it's more of a thematical, due to the fact that we're studying medieval societies instead of studying a lot of different societies around a theme. We're just studying the theme of medieval Europe, West Europe. There will be a performative assessment in the beginning of the unit. It's a super short quiz that has super simple questions about just really basic knowledge regarding what is feudalism, why is it medieval Europe, what caused medieval Europe, or what was the event that like kind of caused medieval Europe, things like that. There will be formative assessments throughout the unit, such as exit tickets, quizzes, classroom observations, and finally, the summative for the unit will be a document-based question response. We've done 2 so far this year, and what we do is we go over primary and secondary sources of class for about 2 or 3 class periods, analyze them, pull out evidence, and then the test is me giving them a document-based question, and they have to use the sources we've been going over as a class to answer this question in a response that has a claim, evidence, and analysis. So it's a very structured response, and we're working on getting better at those. Levels of thinking is very similar to levels of questioning. In the beginning, kids are just defining vocabulary words, collecting general information, being asked to recall pieces of information. In the next week, they're applying that information by analyzing primary sources, categorizing evidence into separate arguments, and finally, the students will be asked to make a judgment call or an argument regarding the system of feudalism. Informal assessments will just be assessed by observing students' answers in their work. Quizzes will be just assessed on a point system, so if you get a correct answer, you get 1 or 2 points depending on the type of question. But the document-based question is graded on a response rubric, so it evaluates their claim, evidence, and whether they attempted analysis. Did they attempt it? No, yes, and was it really good analysis? So with this rubric, they really get credit for trying, which I really enjoy. but they still don't pass unless they have all those key parts, or at least attempt all those key parts. Primary sources are pretty heavy in the second week. Our primary sources that we'll be looking at are kind of two-sided. So we'll be looking at the more human side of feudalism. So what was the life of a peasant like? By looking at a poem, a secondary source, as well as an image. And then the next day, we'll be looking at two documents that show a more economic, happy version of feudalism. So just a really detailed inventory of one of the estates that shows just everything that's on it. And then an image of happy peasants working on a really bright manner, so showing just kind of a different side. Primary sources will also be used throughout slideshow presentations and images taken from medieval manuscripts, paintings, tapestries, and we'll be talking about those as we go through the slideshows in the first week. Secondary sources, a lot of the information I got was from History Alive, The Medieval World and Beyond. Students don't have a copy of it, but I did pull some information for it for content delivery. And yes, graphic images. Images are a larger part of this unit than they have been in the past. Like I said, two of the primary sources are actually images, so we'll be using that. The discussion does not contain a Socratic seminar, but students will be forced to discuss their ideas in small groups, and then we will come together large group, and I will ask them to discuss it further. I haven't decided exactly yet how that large group discussion is going to go, but it could, I'm still deciding if I want to make it a Socratic seminar-y design, or I need to do a little bit more research, basically. So now let's move into just briefly going over the daily plans. So this is the first day. So this is just really us going over vocabulary and the performative assessment. So they get the performative assessment, which is super simple, and then they get vocabulary worksheet, where they are matching words to their definitions and trying to use clues to figure out what each word is on their own, and then we're going to go over it as a class. But I do want them to try it on their own first. And then they do have some vocabulary homework on that time. Day 2, lesson 2 is a slideshow PowerPoint presentation where students are taking notes. So they will be giving a note sheet, which they are familiar with. They've seen it before, this kind of note sheet we're doing. And I will be going through with information, questions, and we're going to do a slideshow on feudalism and the important parts of feudalism. And you can see just briefly it's not pretty yet, but you can see kind of what the information is on each, see this, so that's a primary source. And there's turn-in talks embedded in them. But yeah, mostly just content delivery on that specific day. Lesson 3 is Church and State Intro. We're going to begin the class with kind of an activity where half the class is given the role of monarchs and half the class is given a role as the Pope. And they're each given scenarios, and their main goal is to maintain power. And they have to come up with a solution to the scenario in which their role maintains power. And they have to come up with justification for whichever solution they choose. And then students will so they'll do it independently at first, then they will get in small groups, discuss what they chose, what their justification is, and then we will come as a full group to discuss what each side picked. There will obviously be conflict because they're each trying to maintain power, and then that conflict will very nicely lead into just a short PowerPoint I have regarding the church, what the church was, what its role was in medieval Europe, and how there was this constant tension between the Pope and monarchs of Europe because each of them obviously wanted to maintain power. So here is just the church and state PowerPoint briefly. It's very short due to the fact that the activity will take up most of the time and will really get to the heart of what I'm trying to even communicate in this PowerPoint. So you have church and state, an example of conflict, and then I'm just briefly going over the Crusades and what they are. Lesson 4 is just a review. It's just going to be a Jeopardy style review where each student has a whiteboard. They write their answers on the whiteboard and then keep track of their right or wrongs on a piece of paper. And students with an 80 above will get a prize at the end. So probably just a piece of candy or something, but getting them just to review the information that we'd covered the last, 3 days in class. And then lesson 5 is just a quiz. It's just a simple quiz on the content we had gone over in class. The purpose of this is I just want to make sure they understand the fundamental parts of medieval Europe before we move on to kind of a more nuanced understanding of feudalism using primary sources. I want them to really understand what we're talking about. So this is a quiz to see if they have that basic understanding or not. Lesson 6 is a review of document-based questions. We're going to have just came back from a really long break, so we're going to do an activity where we're just going over what are the elements of a document-based question, how do we go about preparing for one, and what is the grading like on one. Just a refresher to have them really understand what we're talking about, because I'm sure many of them will have forgotten. And then they will also look at the last document-based question they wrote, as well as some of the revisions they were working on right before break. And I'm going to ask them to form a goal around this next coming document-based question. So what are they going to do better? Lesson 7 is beginning to work with primary sources. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to directly teach an annotation strategy. We're going to fill out an annotation toolbar. And then they're going to go through and read the primary source with that annotation toolbar. And then we're going to go over as a class, like what did they underline as the main parts of the text. So this is the primary source document. The first day will be the first 3 primary sources. So we'll go over document 1, answer some questions about it, talk about it. We'll go through document 2, they'll annotate it, they'll annotate each one, but they'll annotate it, answer questions about it, we'll talk about what do we learn from it, what is it saying about feudalism, and then we'll go over this document where noble people are kind of like walking across a river that is filled with what you would believe to be peasants. And what does that say about feudalism and how people were feeling? The next day, so lesson 8, we're going over these primary source documents, which is just a very detailed kind of inventory of one of Charlemagne's estates. What I'm hoping we get at with this is like, look at how productive a manor could actually be. Like, look at all of these things, like a very economic side to feudalism. And then we have this image that shows very like smiling peasants working on a really bright farm. Nobles are coming to like see their work. And so showing like almost more a happy side of feudalism. So kind of comparing and contrasting these primary documents. That's lesson 8, going over those last 2 documents. And then lesson 9 is an evidence gathering / discussion day. So students will be asked to gather evidence, as in quotes, from, I'm almost out of time, from each of the documents. Was feudalism an economic form of, or efficient form of economic, social, and organization? Was feudalism not? They get evidence for each. And then we're going to discuss that also as a class. And then the last day, students will be asked to answer a prompt. And the prompt is, was feudalism an efficient form of government? Do you agree with this statement? And then they'll do that. And that is my presentation.